to the Adventuring Party for the first week of November 2022. This week, the Tome of Gygax reveals more of its secrets. How to manage your subhuman minions, how to build your Fortress of Dread, and how to run D&D. The Adventuring Party, discussing tabletop and radio gaming the Irish way.
And welcome back to KYOC D&D DMG, broadcasting to you on page 105 of the Warlord network. Over to our host, Warlord Scarr. How you doing, Warlord?
I'm doing 10-4 with this still being Heart of Clarm Clock. Do we want to talk about politics today, or just have old people call in to complain about video games?
Well, I thought maybe we'd just get a quick weather update in the Blood Wars. How's that looking?
Still raining blood.
Marvellous. Okay, well, right after these messages, folks, we're going to come back to you with episode 16 of Tome of Gygax. So, don't touch that dial. Which is to say, yeah, here we are. Myself, Savage Mick, and the eponymous Warlord Scarr.
Yeah, Warlord Scarr is here to once again battle Gary Gygax and his scurrilous attempts to misrepresent the proud tradition of bloodthirsty orc savages. And myself, as a veteran of, raiding across the countryside, destroying all life, I feel like it is very important that we redress the balance on the use of non-human troops in your genocidal campaigns against all that is holy.
Yeah, and drink. We should do a little bit of drinking as well.
A little of that, yeah.
Just to get us through this. Okay, so we ended up last time with some nonsense about bandit camps, if I recall correctly. We're moving on to the more exciting type of NPC, the non-human troop.
Yes, we are on page 105 of the original first edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Dungeon Master's Guide, and I struggle to really comprehend the imagination of what an orc is that this 1979 piece of work is trying to bring across.
Of its time, perhaps? We've learned so much about our orc friends and allies since then, and we need to be careful to make amends for the gross misrepresentations of the past. We're really, really sorry about the Warcraft movie. Just want to put that out.
Do you know what the craziest thing is for me? Is that there's a section in the second last paragraph of the page which implies that orcs don't care about money.
Maybe they don't. Do they? If they did, would they be hanging around a dungeon full of money? Or would they be in Orc Vegas going, don't ask me where I got all this money?
It's just very weird because the middle of this section goes to great lengths to explain that if you are literally beating your orc troops over the head personally, then there's a good 30 to 50% chance every time you don't look at them that they're going to go off and kill your human troops and start looting their corpses. But then, a couple of paragraphs later, it says, granting the troops a higher rate of pay is generally viewed as weakness in a leader and will cause them to become more unruly, not less.
Okay, so, look, I think there's a couple of things to probably remind our listeners of. This version of D&D, First Ed, Advanced Dungeons & Dragons? Dungeons.
Yeah. No, this is Advanced Dungeons & Dragons.
The assumption is that at a particular point in your campaign, every single player character is probably going to have a retinue that might exceed dozens. In fact, they might even raise entire companies of NPC followers. And that's what this section is kind of doing. You saw yeomen and bowmen and fusiliers and whatever. Fine. Regular humans, they work for money. They are just to pay fealty to a lord, whatever. Perfectly understandable. I mean, we all do it, right? We've all paid fealty to a lord at some point. But non-human troops, their motivations might be ever so slightly different. Not to mention their supposed proclivities for beating any actual human troops even those that are their colleagues of, they might just go and rampage on them if there's nothing better to do. Obviously, this is a horrible misrepresentation of these noble and doughty fighters, except for the percentage chances of it happening.
It's weird because there's multiple charts. There's another chart the next page, which is to see what happens if you put bugbears and gnolls next to each other. How likely are they to start killing each other?
So this is the basic acceptability of racial types chart we've got here. And it's each of the races on the two axes and a cross-reference to go, it's going to kick off, mate. It's going to go Millwall. It's going to go... What's an American college football team that no matter win or lose, they go nuts?
I don't remember.
Our listeners will know. That's basically what we're talking about here.
A pre-made race war chart was not exactly what I was expecting in the DMG.
The Manson-esque helter-skelter is coming, no matter how much you pay them.
The weird thing is, like, this the chart says that most these species are fine getting along with themselves, except for orcs and hobgoblins, who will apparently have such massive tribal disagreements that if you have two sets of hobgoblins of different tribes, they will just start mutilating each other in front of you.
Are you really? I mean, you're from where exactly? Donegal?
Yeah.
Are you really that surprised?
It's just like, okay, this is like the third section we've had on how to manage your troops, and
not in a row, but scattershot throughout the book, just in case. So you've got these different levels of people management skills you're going to pick up in the course of reading the DMG, and we're on to the really advanced stuff here. How to hold the army together when some of them have mysteriously disappeared into the cooking pots of the others.
I don't know, like, how much of this is Gygax getting a real chuckle out of the idea of all of these various savage tribes having go each other, and how much of it is sort of backhanded vengeance for Rob Kuntz accidentally putting together an army full of orcs and decimating the Tomb of Horrors?
Probably informed by it, at the very least. I think it's nice that there's some systems here to account for this. Like, if your campaign goes that way, if players amass large followings, if those followings contain significant numbers of non-humans, well then, instead of just leaving it to the GM to come up with who's eating who for dinner, fluff that joke. Who's having who for dinner? Then he can. It's a handy chart. It's like, oh, well, I know that hill giants will not get on with gnolls that well.
Where's the elves and dwarves section on this chart?
Those are civilized races. Let's not go crazy here.
Yeah.
Yeah. You raise a very good question, and you do highlight an obvious bias. But this is a D&D where there were just wrong bad hombres in the modern parlance. You didn't have to think too hard about their motivation. You just had to know that they were different. They were other, and they were not to be trusted. And if you didn't keep a lid on it, they would break out into this sort of internecine tribal or interracial helter-skelter-esque warfare at the drop of a horned helmet. But elves and dwarves, they're basically people. I mean, not as good as people, but you can pretty much trust them to keep the knives and forks on the table. That kind of thing. I don't subscribe to the sort of mapping of fantasy races onto particular real-world ethnic groups, but it was very much... It's something you could get all head up about if you did happen to subscribe to that sort of reading of D&D. Those waters, of course, muddied time and time again by unhelpful writers going and borrowing particular races or cultures wholesale and slapping them on to something else. So thanks for that. I don't know, how's Gygax doing this? Probably for chuckles, and probably yes, because one of his players got up his nose a bit. But his way of getting back at them is to insert yet another table into this book. Thanks, Gary.
Oh, do you think we're done with tables for the day? We have only just begun, my friend, because now we are moving on to the section on building and besieging castles.
Oh, goody. That's gotta be fun, right?
Okay, so previously we had all of the rules on how to staff your castle and how to pay for all your blacksmiths and labourers and candlestick makers and so forth. But now, something like 80 pages later, this is now the time for the individual. How fast can 4 giants cut a 10-foot wide shaft in solid rock? And how many gold pieces does each barbican on the wall of your castle cost?
All vital information. I think the giants now is the John Henry of the D&D world. Just keeps going, just keeps cutting.
Even in First Ed, when giants were substantially more manageable in size than they are in Fifth Ed, where they're basically Godzilla, even then, the idea that you're going to force 4 of these 12-foot tall individuals into one 10-foot wide tunnel and have them chip out the rock with, presumably some kind of chisels.
Oh, sweet child of somebody. Presumably you've never worked in a tunnel or down quarry. Let me tell you, there's 4 of them. They're taking turns, because that's the only reasonable way to dig a hole. You take turns, because it's bloody hard work. Or you're passing the bucket line, which is like having a rest. But there's only one of them down there at a time. Yeah, they take turns. And they're probably not forcing them, they're probably paying them in orc skulls or something. Let me just look at the table. Who do hill giants hate?
No, actually, yeah, for some reason, giants are very absent from the race war chart, but there are stats for everything else. Apparently, gnolls are much bigger than I realized. But yeah, so we have another section on labor management and effectiveness, but also this is a bit more intense than Minecraft. This is like mapping out the costs of carving arrow slits into and windows into individual things. This is very much trying to turn your abstract imaginary castle that you went 100 miles into the wilderness to build down to the copper piece, down to each individual door and window. How big's your moat? How many murder holes have you implanted?
But this is such rich stuff, not particularly for a game of D&D where it becomes loathsome logistics very, very quickly. But, I mean, you can look at this and go, I can see exactly how the Stronghold series or RimWorld or Dwarf Fortress drew direct inspiration from this sort of stuff. This is beautiful.
Oh, yeah, it's absolutely amazingly evocative, but it's unworkable for an RPG unless you are literally going to spend an extra session just mapping out and counting the windows on your castle.
You know those players with graph paper somewhere that are like, hold my beer.
I'm not saying that there's no one who would do it. It's just I think this is actually something I've heard a bit mentioned of late on various things, is that there is a certain level of this game which sort of has to be played in side sessions or between weekly sessions. There's a certain amount by which you have to have one player come over of a Wednesday and hash something out with the GM. Stuff like raising armies or building castles or visits to a sage, or if you've gone to bribe local politician and you have to bribe 10 others on the way there because they're hanging out on the street like beggars.
It would form a lovely correspondence during the week where you could write a letter detailing your provisioning of the castle and any local bribes need to be paid. And your GM would read the letter in the morning and would perhaps sit in quiet contemplation afternoon, say, and pen a letter for the evening post, and would be sent back. You would receive it in the evening post. And over supper, you'd finally turn to the letter and use the butter knife to slice it open and read your GM's response and think to yourself, well, before I go out for my constitutional next morning, I will pen a reply, have it in the morning post for my GM. And it would go on like this, in a very genteel and sort of college town fashion.
I mean, play-by-mail was a big thing back in those days.
Yes, I mean, it would suit email these days, and I've definitely spent time in chat sessions with players and GMs where I was ostensibly working. Got pretty badly caught once, but that's a story for another time, folks.
I do remember Dragon Magazine and similar things like it would be filled with these advertisements for these sort of state-scale play-by-mail games, or even play-by-email or It's just like this weird thing of you'd have like these weekly turns or something, and you get a document either mailed to you or emailed, and it'd be like 20 pages of results. Your army has gone 37 miles to Hexagon A3. You still have 437 arrows remaining. Meanwhile, you have your castle in the hex next door is at 47% completion and 20% combat power. And that worked for a lot of people, but it sort of grows out of this kind of mindset. We're sort of coming back to the thing where how much of this book you can use in a D&D game, we can go back and forth on that, but there's an awful lot of this you could use to inspire any number of other games. Even after 5 years of development and getting away from the old habit of whenever you need to go hex crawling, crack out an Avalon Hill game and steal its hex map, even though we're far from that, we're still in a paradigm where other game types are creeping in and sort of swinging off from the main, what we consider the core role-playing game experience. There's still an awful lot of war game and management game DNA here, some of it old, some of it new.
Yeah, I mean, how usable is it? Yeah, that's questionable. There is a system here that you can crunch through if you really want to. I guess its other kind of low-key benefit is that now you know all the names of the different parts of the castle.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, definitely. There's embouchures and merlons and palisades and pilasters. And also, I think somewhere there's rules about how many guards you need to keep the race wars from starting in your slave armies who build this castle.
I don't know why you're not paying them, Warlord. It'd be much simpler. Not a lot.
But if I pay them, they'll think I'm weak.
If you pay them too much. Anyways, we can talk about labor relations later. So and then of course, having costed all of this, it's very expensive. Now let's see how much more it's going to cost you when someone sets fire to it. So we move on to basically sieging. Yeah, get a good old siege going. Who doesn't like a good old siege? It's a way to test your creation, or see if you picked out a weakness, or maybe you just don't like marching much, and it's a great opportunity to sit around and wait. And, I don't know, poison a well or something.
So the thing that immediately stood out to me was the revelation that cauldrons cost 50 gold pieces each. And for the price of 3 cauldrons, you can buy a light catapult.
Yeah, like any fool could knock together a light catapult inside of Wet Weekend. Cauldrons require, first of all, you've got to have a big enough forge to make one. And if it's a cauldron of any decent size, like, look, is this for sieging? Or you can't it's not like pouring a hot kettle over them. You're going to need gallons and gallons of boiling water. I'm sure you folks all know this, but no one ever poured boiling picture oil in a siege. It's bloody expensive stuff. You might as well pour boiling perfume on top. No, you just boil up a bunch of water. It's going to hurt just as much. But yeah, cauldrons, great big bloody things. Very high tech for the age. Requires a fine hand to make. A catapult is a bunch of hopefully decent timbers and rope and some physics. Physics is cheap. You can get it for free. Cauldrons, that takes some doing. You're not really paying for the cauldrons themselves. You're paying for all the ones that cracked.
I guess. Also, rams cost 500 gold pieces and a ram catcher costs 20.
What's a ram catcher?
It is a fork or hook of iron on a long pole, lowered by defenders to catch and hold a ram or sow at work on a wall. The defenders then raise the catcher to disable or break the ram.
Now, a ram, again, this is your high-impact, sabo-round, armor-piercing, ballistic spalling thing of the siege world. This is the pointy end where it meets the wall. So yeah, ram's gonna, it has to be harder than whatever it's hitting. So that, again, requires a lot of specialized forging. And you probably want it in the shape of something terrifying, like, I don't know, TV license inspector? Our American listeners won't understand what that is, but look it up. It's an unusual quirk of our culture. So yeah, that's something you don't want knocking on the door. So yeah, 500. Look, why are you griping over price? You can get tens of thousands of gold pieces out of even a moderately well-stocked dungeon.
Yeah. I don't know, it's just like...
Gotta spend it on something, right?
The insistence on economics.
There's a lot of it.
Yeah. But we also have the actual rules for how much wall damage a given... I don't think... Okay, it's...
These rules, and we've covered something like them previously, these rules have given rise to some of the worst child rules in D&D in subsequent editions, because they kind of saw this and went, oh, okay, that's how we're meant to do it. And then they decided, actually, no, this is too difficult, let's just go with hit points. So everything started out with kind of those hardness points, and there was structure, kind of equivalent to structural hit points, and then I think they've eventually defaulted hit points. It's awful. And don't even get me started on any vehicle in current D&D. Like if any round of D&D in the current mold had given even half as much thought to, say, the statistics for vehicle building and combat that Mr. Gygax has given us here for the slowest of vehicles, the castle, then we'd be in a much better place as far as I'm concerned. Bloody, like, ships have hit points now, and they're basically statted like monsters. That's not how a ship works. That's not how anything works. Okay, some ships in Spelljammer are actually monsters, but that's beside the point. Yes. Anyways, let's get off this dangerous ground. Oh no, we'll go to something much simpler to negotiate. The section called Conducting the Game. Is there some other wall to be knocked in before we leave off sieging?
No, just... For some reason I assumed that there was something called a mangonel as well as an onager.
Mangonel sounds like a thing, yeah. We could look it up now, but we'll just... You know what, folks? Join us on our Discord. Check show notes for a link. Where we can discuss whether a mangonel is in fact real, or, like happiness, is an imaginary construct. Or a manticore has more than one head.
Sorry, there is one thing at the very end of page 109 I want to quote.
Oh, yeah?
Which is, it is important that the reader understand that all the values, the page and a half of tables that's just occurred, that all values are representative only, and the entire process of siege warfare would prove interminable in a campaign, so it's been speeded up here to force sallies and counterattacking or the fall of the fortress.
Well, that's interesting. That is genuinely interesting. If you think this is too dense and complicated, well, let me tell you, actually sieging takes a lot longer. I've condensed it here for brevity. After about 5 pages of various costings and tables. And he's right. You do want to get to the most dramatic bit as soon as possible. You do want the ladders to go up. You do want the flaming cow carcasses to arc through the sky. You do want the sally gates to open and the tuberculosis-ridden defenders to sally out. So, I guess, perhaps once you've got it all under your belt, this stuff just runs tickety-boo, like a clock. But I suppose, given that neither of us are ever going to attempt it, we might just fire up Stronghold instead. I guess we're just going to have to imagine all of that lovely money. Like, man, castles, especially any castle in danger of being sieged, which is, in fairness, what they're for, is going to run you a pretty penny in terms of building it, fitting it out, and then repairing it after it, should you withstand said siege. I don't know, what's the resale value on rams? I mean, hopefully there'll be a few of them lying around. You can kind of offset the costs. Now, it's been 110 pages. Shall we move on to the guidance for Dungeon Masters?
Yeah, after 110 pages of this Dungeon Master's Guide, we should guide some Dungeon Masters. Okay, so, first piece of advice, fudge your dice.
It's in a section called Rolling the Dice and Control of the Game. Yeah.
You do have every right to overrule the dice at any time there is a particular course of events that you would like to have occur. Gygax says, fudge the dice.
He says a lot of things in block capitals, including, before we get out he ends the first paragraph with this lovely bit of wisdom, which is always give a monster an even break, ! Which is an interesting thought.
It's... I can't believe it. Like, after...
He's right, though. If you've run any game for any length of time, you'll start to understand that actually, especially D&D in its current form, is very heavily weighed in favour of the players after, say, 3rd level. So there's absolutely no point in not playing like a complete bastard in terms of what monsters will do on their turn. They should never They should never pull punches. They should always go for the weakest party member. They should do their damnedest coordinated attacks. They should use every underhanded trick in the book. They should tip over those cauldrons of boiling water. They should do anything they can to give your players a hard time, because players are going to get to do way more often. And it's your job as the GM, the man says himself, to always give a monster an even break. Because it's a bit part, it's appearing for a few minutes, and then it's gone. So make it memorable, because there's nothing worse than something popping out of the monster closet, appearing to be terrifying for about 5 seconds, and then going down after a couple of hits. What else you got capitals here? Oh, okay, so he has said fudge the dice, but I noticed towards the end of the section, there's one dice roll that you should never tamper with, and I don't actually know what it is. A system shock roll?
Oh, that's... Okay, so that was a mechanic. It's basically like an extra saving throw based on your constitution. I presume the table is in the PHB. It's something like basically multiply your constitution by 5. It was one of those additional balancing methods that he had, similar to how casting Wish made you age by 5 years. There was a thing where certain spells like Polymorph, you had a chance to just, you roll your system shock roll, and if you mess up, you just drop dead, because your heart's been turned into a dragon's heart, and it's backwards or something, and
as you do,
your blood doesn't work properly for a second and you die. And it's an interesting way to, presumably due to the way Polymorph was written back then, it was probably considered quite overpowered to just be able to just willy-nilly turn any party member into whatever monster you were beaten by last week. And so this was the big balancing thing, is that you never had more than, like, even if you were Con 18 Superman, that only meant you had a 90% chance to survive. Oh, you can't over-rely on polymorphing with that kind of odds.
Yeah, pretty good. Like, there has to be some consequences somewhere down the line.
But you can see how this didn't survive. Because it was a random chance, it wasn't a fun or predictable way to use a spell, and people pushed back against it. And eventually we got 3rd Ed, where polymorphing yourself into... I think the really good one was like a gargantuan fiendish octopus or something, and you could just do 8 grapple checks per round and just crush your opponents to...
See my previous comments about give the monsters an even break. Players have come up with all sorts of nonsense. Yeah, fair enough though. Random deaths off the back of... Because the only thing it does is disincentivize using a cool spell. So, but he's talking about here the system shock roll for being raised from the dead.
Oh yeah, there's also had a roll when you're raised from the dead. It was not a guaranteed thing. You're allowed to take your chances there.
So, having killed players, you've got to start handling the ones that don't take it very well.
Yes.
So you move on to handling troublesome players, which gets a scant 300 words.
Yeah, 3 paragraphs. Gygax is relatively blunt, with the main thing at the end of the first paragraph being, simply put, ask them to leave, or don't invite them to come again. Seems that Gygax did not suffer from what we would call the geek social fallacy, and he was he certainly claims here that he was more than willing to just turf anyone he didn't like out of the game at will. Although I will say, again, Gygax's attitude to easy come, easy go players is probably biased a little by the fact that he's Gary Gygax and he can get a game in any city in America at this point on a drop of a hat. So,
but he won't allow himself to be held hostage by unruly players, and that's fair. Look, unless you're on a desert island with a football called Wilson, there are other players out there that are probably better suited to your needs. You should probably never play with friends, would be my take on that. You don't want to play with people that you run the risk of offending. So play with strangers. Play with your enemies. And if you don't have any enemies, you will after you've run a game using the Gygax method.
This is an entire other episode about, I can't kick him out of my game, he's the only player I have problem. But it is interesting to see that Gygax is very blunt about this, and has managed to put something that has harassed, lonely GMs for years into 3 paragraphs of ice. The second paragraph is another one where he seems to be advocating, getting the entire group to peer pressure unruly players into compliance, which is one of those behavior types which is grand if it's good, but not good if it's not good.
Look, if you don't like someone, you don't like them. One would have to ask the question why they're in your group to begin with, but you cross that bridge. Now it's time to burn it down. So, yeah, look, it's short because there's only one good answer here. Toss them and keep going.
I think the thing is, yeah, you start with the big blunt answer at the start, which is probably the best of these. Peer pressure, which is not always bad advice, but, you know, a paragraph is not a huge thing to elaborate on. Then he starts going into the, you know, at the very end, I think he mainly to make space. He just puts in the whole add more monsters that attack them, have them be attacked by ethereal mummies, and then, of course, you know, blue bolts from the heavens, and losing permanent charisma because you're being... Because, I don't know. The bad advice seems to be lumped into the third paragraph here, and not really differentiated from the rest.
If you can't stomach the real answer, then here, try this stuff. But don't blame me when it doesn't work.
Yeah, he does finish again, is that the ultimate answer to such a problem is to exclude the destructive person from further gatherings. So, yeah, I think this third paragraph is more, I should probably mention these things even though they're not a great idea.
Yeah. Oh, there's a much more interesting section after this, and one that clearly he had more to say on, because obviously he had lots of different people with different experience levels. The section is integration of experienced or new players into an existing campaign, something he must have been dealing with constantly with the kind of churn of players, and that he kept kicking people out or killing them.
Yeah.
And there's quite a bit here. I'll be perfectly honest, I haven't read it. So let's have a little look. Anything from this we could draw our opine on?
I mean, there's the general flow of it, which is implied that be relatively accepting, but don't go easy on new players with new characters, and be very, very careful of someone comes along saying, yeah, I was playing with Dave Arneson for a few years. I have this level 17 Paladin, 3 Holy Avengers. Funny how that happened. Can we play now? And there's some harsh advice in for that kind of thing, implying that it did actually happen to Gygax a couple of times.
But it's weird. It kind of seems to suppose that there's no such thing as, you know, build a fifth level player, or build a 5th level character, or, you know, build a 7th level ranger or whatever, paladin, you know, something actually useful. Gary's always assuming that characters will always arrive as organic entities. They come from somewhere real. They came from a real game. They were leveled for real, rather than the kind of the blank slate, I suppose, the clean cover stories we get whenever you're meant to go to a game and realize you don't have a character and hit D&D Beyond and have a 7th level rogue done in about 5 minutes flat. Like, I mean, making characters at this time, Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, wasn't terribly complicated. You get through it in a couple of hours tops. But was the requirement that it be a character that comes from a real campaign somewhere else? I wonder.
It just seems to be in the style, like, because, again, Gygax knew Dave Arson's group, who were playing for like a year or two before Gygax actually put together his game. There was the very American fact that Lake Geneva and Minnesota are only 300 miles apart, so clearly it was no big thing to have, you know, someone drive over to have a quick game with Gary of a weekend. I don't know. I don't understand American driving habits.
Does distance work differently on the other side of the pond? Because 600 round trip seems like a hell of a thing.
Americans don't measure... Oh, how is it put? In England, 100 miles is a long distance, and in America, 100 years is a long time. But yes, apparently just driving 300 miles for a day trip was apparently not a crazy thing. And of course, people would be over for Gen Con, which was Gygax's locally run convention back then.
Just a little thing, you know, a couple of friends, a couple of tables. Okay, look, I remain baffled by the notion that you can just jump in the car and head off for multiple hundreds of miles in any direction at whim. But, I mean, the interstate road system, I suppose, makes it all a lot easier. Not even the interstate. Good roads, in general. We have a lot of potholes here, and the grass does actually grow up the middle of some of our roads, folks. So,
yeah,
not exactly something you can stick the Chevy into autopilot. Does Chevys have autopilot? I doubt. But that's beside the point. The point is we should get on with this episode. We're nearly done now.
Yeah. The thing is, Gygax did not want to automatically... he still envisaged this sort of network of campaigns all across America, and that people would just kind of go between one and the other. And presumably because they had, through their own player skill, earned their character being that level, that they should be allowed to keep it. So that was just a thing he assumed. He does have a thing for experienced players who don't have an existing character. And this is actually weird, because this is the first time he suggests allowing someone to come in at around about the same level as the rest of the party.
Okay.
This is... we saw earlier, about 80 pages back, that he was insistent that the new players had to start at first level, because that was the real way to start your D&D career. But he does here give an exception for people who are experienced with the game, they just don't have a character, or they have not transferred Agamemnon the Invincible from their previous game and are just showing up with a blank character sheet. In that case, you are allowed to have roughly the same level. So I find that interesting, because it implies that a stronger link between player skill and character level than we would insist on here.
Yeah, that seems fair. It's a practical solution to a practical problem. Because, as he says, experienced players have seen what the delights of first and second level hold, and perhaps are a little jaded by them now. They don't want to go in the basement and hit rats, and the GM probably doesn't want to run. However, they could end up doing so if you're catering to a complete neophyte, who you'd then sort of tack on your experienced players as men-at-arms and other essentially non-leveling characters. Men-at-arms don't level, do they?
I don't think so. Henchmen level, hirelings don't.
So yeah, he's talking about then. And almost saying, look, it is more important that new players get to play at lower levels than experienced players get to play at higher levels. He's focused on growing the hobby. He's focused on getting people excited by letting them have those first green shoot experiences of D&D, which I think is commendable. And if you're an experienced player and not a douche nozzle, you're probably going to be happy enough to play along for a while. Get the new player up to speed, get a few levels in the belt, and then transfer back to your existing character. Having played a Doty yeoman, having gone fully white company on this sucker. Arthur Conan Doyle book, go read it, it's very good. No one solves any mysteries. It's really cool. It's set during some Middle Ages warfare between France and England, and it's fantastic. It's a great book. Go read it. Okay.
Well, this section sort of peters out with a section on make sure that even if you do let in a character from another campaign, you do not let them bring over their magic items, because that will just unbalance everything.
Contraband. Okay.
Yeah. He does, however, say that it is okay to let a new player have a couple of potions or something, but not to give them a magic sword. So, again, this advice, it's interesting in connection to the previous advice that we got, again, 80 pages back about this. But as we said, the editor had literally just started working here a week ago. So, how are they to know that, this piece of advice was going to be connected?
Okay. One more section, and then we'll wrap it up for this episode, because I think there's a good break point.
Well, I thought the good break point was the bunch of wizards and clerics playing papers and paychecks in the corner.
It's a good, nice little piece of artwork. I'll put some of that in the title card. The good break point was about 20 pages ago, but let's not dwell on that. So the last sort of permutation of players and characters, whatever, is multiple characters for a single player. Interesting idea. I've seen it done very well. Former show host Blackroad 1 ran an excellent Star Wars campaign where we all got to play multiple characters who had different roles and seniority in a larger ship's crew. So it's a cool thing to do, and and a ship's crew is a great place to do it. But what does Gary have to say about it here? In fact, the first thing he says is, yeah, there's no prohibition regarding it.
There's no absolute prohibition, implying that he doesn't think it's necessarily a great idea, but he doesn't want to, stop someone from doing it.
Your funeral, baby GM. Your funeral.
Yeah. One player can have several characters, providing he or she is a good cooperative campaign participant capable of properly handling such multiple roles. However, the multiple characters belonging to a single player should not be associates. They should not know each other's information or be able to communicate knowledge which would be peculiar to a given player. This is the first time we've had real mandatory role-playing, is that if you have two of your characters in the same party, you may be obligated to have the two of them start arguing in order to legitimize your play of both.
Not only is it a good idea, it's absolutely goddamn delicious when you do have one of your characters completely screw over one of your other characters. There's nothing quite like it, and by extension, a whole bunch of other people's characters as well. I'd advise anybody to give it a go. It's great fun. And it gives you a lot of freedoms. You can play a complete freak, and not have everyone at the table kind of go, okay, should we take a vote on this guy now? Because they know you've got one sort of wild lunatic off to one side, and all your other characters are perfectly reasonable, more or less. And I'll let you know if I ever manage that. Yeah, it's a lot of homework, a lot of headaches, and that idea that you shouldn't be allowed to sort of gestalt, hive mind it. Yes, that seems like a hard-won bit of quality advice from Gary. And it'll make the game more interesting. Like, honestly, try it, folks. You haven't tried it. Just give it a go.
It does sort of betray Gary's GM does everything attitude, though, because in the modern day, we would be, if we were giving someone multiple characters, or even if they had hirelings or henchmen along with them, generally the modern approach would be that the GM will role-play them, but it would be the player would be running them, and we would sort of gloss over if they were being a little bit too pro-PC. But my reading of this is that Gygax would expect that he would be running the NPCs most of the time from the way this, and also that's a similar work of differentiating characters is also on the heads of anyone who happens to have multiple.
Oh yeah, look, as for players, any players out there, as much as possible, try and avoid talking to yourself, because it's just boring. We don't really like it when the GM does it. It's tempting something, but it's boring. Don't do it. So, I mean, another great reason to have at least one of your characters at cross purposes with others is it avoids that opportunity to collaborate or even converse. Just no, don't do it. It's everyone else at the table will just hate you with good cause. So talk to somebody else. It's what you came there to do, right? Turn to another player and talk to their character. Yeah, don't talk to your own characters as your character. Write them a letter. Put it in the Morning Post. All right. Which is probably a good place to draw a line under this Tome of Gygax episode.
Now that we've stopped paying all our Kobold troops and they're listening to us again, I think we can march on from this point and off to our Discord server to have a horrible genocidal war of attrition and also some hearty discussion about whether Gygax was crazy or full of good advice.
Well, it only took him, 105 pages to get the advice bit. He wanted to work up to it, clearly. So yeah, we will see you next time, folks. I've been Savage Mick.
I've been Warlord Scarr.
This has been yet another episode of Tome of Gygax, Dungeon Master's Guide, 1st edition. Edition? Yeah, okay, we should just stop there. Alright, good night.
Good night. Thanks for listening to The Adventuring Party. You can find show notes and links to things we've mentioned at www.theadventuringparty.net and on our Facebook page. You can leave comments there, or talk to our Twitter account @AdventuringPTY, or you can record a voice message at www.speakpipe.com/theadventuringparty. We can also be contacted directly by email at party@theadventuringparty.net. If you'd like to be in touch with the party all the time, come join our Discord server, link in the show notes. The Adventuring Party is released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share Alike version 3 license.